What's up, dudes? I'm Bold Hunter, and today we're diving into high-sec gank prevention. As both a PvPer and a trader, I wanted to provide you guys some rules and tools to significantly lower your chances of becoming a victim. As high-sec might seem safe, but, there's always players checking if you're worth a gank. So in this video, I'll break down how ganks happen, the tricks gankers use to kill their victims, and most importantly, how you can outsmart them, fly safer, and keep your hard-earned ISK safe. Let's get into it. So, high-sec ganking revolves around the suicide gank. Attacking another player in high-sec that doesn't have the criminal timer, a suspect timer, an active kill right, or that is a war target invokes the wrath of Concord, which is EVE Online's NPC police force. If you attack another player in high-sec, your ship has to die to Concord. It's actually against the terms of service to escape Concord, and it is a bannable offense. So they will sacrifice their ship in order to kill you before Concord arrives. This is known as the suicide gank. But Concord's response time varies greatly based on the security rating of the system, scaling from about 6 seconds in 1.0 systems to taking up to 19 seconds in a 0.5 security system. There are some tricks gankers use, such as pre-spawning Concord at a different grid in the system than the one they are camping. By having Concord pre-spawned at a different place than the camping grid, they can increase Concord's response time by about 6 seconds. So be wary if you see a large amount of Concord ships around a cheap Corvette or T1 frigate hull wreck, as this might be a trick to buy a couple more seconds on a gank somewhere else in the system. To secure a kill before certain death from Concord, gankers go for high damage ships to kill you before Concord lands. In higher security systems, such as 0.8 to 1.0, where Concord's response is very fast, gankers rely on high alpha damage ships. Alpha damage is how much damage your weapons do in one volley, and artillery is the king of alpha damage, so tornadoes are used for larger targets like haulers, and thrashers are used for the shuttles, rookie ships, and untanked T1 frigates. So please don't put Plex or extractors in your rookie ship. It's probably not going to turn out well for you. No. Wait. Then in the lower security systems, such as like 0.5 to 0.7, where the gankers have a little bit more time to apply their damage, they will usually use high DPS blaster ships such as the Catalyst and Talos. Other ships such as Vexers and Ruptures can be used, but they aren't the meta. So, suicide ganking is a numbers game. It's damage versus EHP, so can they kill you before Concord kills them? And then it is risk versus reward, and a fully fit gank NATO is worth about 120 million ISK. So if they manage to kill you, what are the chances that you're going to drop at least 120 mil worth of loot? So now you know what gankers do. Let's get into how they do it. A ganking operation requires 3 main rules to be successful. There will be a scout, the DPS, and the loot extractor. So for the scout role, the T1E war frigates are usually favored. Especially the Vigil, I think a lot of the professional gankers use, because it has a lot of mid slots, 5 mid slots, and it also has the highest base scan resolution of 560 mm, so it's a good starting place. For scan res, then you can fit 2 sensor boosters with scan resolution scripts. Then you can put your passive targeting module, your cargo scanner, and your ship scanner. And then you can fill in the low slots with your signal amplifiers, all to get your scan resolution up. Then I usually go with 2 small targeting system subcontrollers for the scan res. And then I like to put a signal focusing kit in, because that actually reduces the scan time for your cargo scanner and ship scanner. The cargo scanner is pretty good right off the first scan, with as far as the loot value and wherever you're scanning, but the ship scanner usually takes more than one scan for you to get really a good idea of all the modules that are on the ship, but usually with 1 or 2 scans you can kind of get an idea of whether they are tanked sufficiently or not. So the signal focusing kit kind of cuts down on some of that. Then moving into the DPS role, the tornado is usually used because it's the cheapest way to put 8 1400mm artilleries out on the field. And usually they either go with scouts or prototypes, because the Tech 2 were like 8 million ISK each, and that's not cost effective for the suicide ship. So for that same reason, the prototypes are a little bit cheaper than the scouts are, but the scouts have the highest damage modifier, but it only ends up being about 300 or 400 damage in your alpha strike, so it's not that big of a difference. So you're paying about 10 million ISK more for an extra 300 or 400 damage. So I mean, if that's how much you miss your kill by, it sucks, but it's usually safe to go with the cheaper option. Then we usually put 3 sensor boosters in the mid slots with scan resolution scripts, and then 2 tracking computers, because you only get one shot. You want to have as good of a shot as you can get. So I usually go with 2 tracking computers with tracking speed scripts. I fill the lows up with gyro stabs. Put targeting system subcontrollers in the mids for its scan resolution bonus. And then since I only got one shot, I usually go for the projectile collision accelerator, which gives me a little bit of tracking speed because I want to get a good hit in. The damage rig actually doesn't do that much, so it's only a few hundred more damage. So I usually go for the tracking computer, or the tracking rig on this. Then I usually go with domination EMP. It's a little bit more per round than other faction ammo, but we only need one shot per gun, so we need 8 rounds. But that does about 10,700 damage in one alpha strike, so that is the weapon of choice for a suicide gank. Then for the Loot Extractor role, this obviously will vary if it's a frigate that's being ganked or a freighter, but for haulers at least, I usually will opt for a DST, as they have a fleet hangar for somebody to be able to flip the loot over to your ship and keep the aggro onto, say, a scout or something in a cheap ship, and not on your expensive DST. And then if you do grab the loot with this, you at least have the +2 warp core strength, and you can put a warp core stab on top of that, so that the only way you can get caught is somebody has a faction scram and a regular scram. They're going to have doubled up and pretty much be looking for this scenario, which does happen. I lost an Octator on my first gank I ever did to a Stratios that had 2 scrams fit. But I usually have this up at a perch, cloaked, aligned to the gate, and we'll have it warp down whenever it's needed directly to the wreck. So then I wanted to show you guys this all put together on a successful gank. Here I am scanning people with my scout. And Miasmos jumped into me. I'm going to slow this down a hair because I scanned him. I saw that he had 150 mil worth of loot, and that his tank was questionable. So I decided I was going to go for it. I go ahead and warp my tornado down from its shallow safe spot to the gate. I followed him in warp with my scout so I could flip the loot. Then I got ready for the Miasmos to jump into me. I warped down to the gate, turned on all my modules, overheated them. As I'm not worried about heat, I'm not going to live very long. I get my guns preheated, ready to be fired as soon as I locked somebody. I was going to try to look for him on my local chat, but I thought I didn't have enough time, which there he is. So I locked him, fired my shot off immediately and killed him, and then was killed by Concord. And the gate guns actually start firing immediately before Concord arrives, so if you don't have very much tank, you'll go down to those. Then I uncloaked my hauler, and I wasn't properly set up for this really, so I didn't have Rex on my overview. So I had to go to my all. I warped down to the wreck, Then went ahead and got my scout jumped in from the system behind him, as I wanted to try and flip the loot with my scout instead of taking aggro on my hauler. So unfortunately, it takes a second for you to get over to the wreck. Luckily, there wasn't anybody trying to mess with me. And honestly, I probably could have just grabbed it and left, as there wasn't really anything on grid at the time. Then I kind of whiffed on the loot extraction, but it didn't really matter because the loot fairy said no. The big portion of the loot didn't drop. But as you can see, I was still ISK positive overall. Even, at least on the kill board, not in my wallet per se. So now that we've seen a successful gank, let's get into the ways to keep it from happening to you. The biggest threats in high sec are complacency and a false sense of security that high sec means that it's safe. So watch out for suspicious ships, check your D-scan for catalysts or tornadoes, and most importantly, keep an eye on local. So a trick that you can use to watch local is using your contact list. So here I found a player that is in Udama Logistics, and from looking at the kill boards, I know that Udama Logistics is a ganking corporation that is based in Udama. So they gank lots of ships. So I'm going to use my contact list to keep an eye on players from this corporation. So to do that, I'm going to right click on a character that I know is in that corporation, click show info. Then I'm going to click on their core, which should bring up the corporation information tab. And then I can add them as a contact with a bad or terrible standing. Then when I do this, now all players in this corporation are going to show up in local with a red check mark. So by using this, I can now tell very quickly when I jump into a system that there are lots of players that could be looking to cause me harm and to be on high alert. The number one way to avoid being ganked is, well, just don't undock. I know, it's not the most exciting advice, but hey, since undocking is consenting to PvP, why not pay someone else to take the risk? So consider using a third-party service like PushX or Blackfrog, or just throw up a courier contract in the in-game haulers chat channel. It's a small price to pay to avoid getting blown up, especially if you're flying through the infamous 0.5 choke points like Udama, which is basically the Space Detroit of high-sec.
Do you really expect me to not push you up against the wall, biatch?
So to set up a courier contract, you can either do it with an item through your item hanger, but you don't have to be in the same system as the item that you're trying to move. You can also do it through your personal assets. So say if I wanted to move this 3.5 billion worth of Quaif from perimeter to Jita, but I don't want to take the risk myself, I'm going to right click and create a contract. I'm going to either do private if I'm going to use a service like PushX or Blackfrog, and they will give you directions on their website of who to put in as the name. In this case, I'm going to be doing public and putting in the haulers channel. So then I'm going to select a courier contract, and I'm going to go ahead to the next screen. I'm going to have my Quaif selected that I want to ship to Jita, and then I'm going to select Jita Moon 4 Caldari Navy Assembly Plant as the destination. For the reward, I'm going to go to the haulers channel in game, and I'm going to take a look at their base rate calculator. So I'm going to set the collateral for the full amount of what I'm shipping, if I can get enough zeros. 3.5 bill. The volume is pretty low, it's under 500, and I'm only going to take it one jump. So it's saying that I should have a minimum of a 10.5 mil reward for this one jump trip, which seems a little steep, but I don't have to take any risk in moving my 3.5 bill worth of stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and set the reward as 10,500,000 ISK. Not that many. And then I'm going to set my collateral as 3.5 billion. And then I usually will put my expiration to 4 weeks and set my days to complete to 1 day. But you can set this as whatever you want, or if you're using a service like PushX, they might require something specific, usually 7 days to complete. And then I'm going to go ahead to the next screen where I'm going to confirm everything. You just want to double check your reward, make sure you didn't mess that up. Double check your collateral, that you didn't mess that up, because if you make that 350 million, somebody will probably just steal this from you. Then everything looks right. I'm going to hit finish to create the contract, and then I'm going to post it into the Courier Contract channel, and just go ahead and wait for somebody to pick that up and move it over to Jita for me. And this took all of about 8 minutes to be completed for me. But moving valuable items around can safely be done, you just need to follow some rules and not get complacent. Prevention is the name of the game, so the most important things happen before you even undock. The first rule is to not travel too high of a loot value for the size of your ship. If you're in a frigate, 10 mil can make you a target, as a thrasher is only worth a few million, while in a hauler you want to keep your value under 100 mil, as a tornado is about 120. You can increase this accordingly if you're able to take multiple tornadoes. And freighters should stay under about $500 million to $1 billion ISK, as a untanked freighter can be killed by about 300 million ISK worth of catalyst, while a properly fit freighter can require over a 2 billion ISK gank fleet to secure. These are rules of thumb, but generally if your ship and cargo is worth as much or more than the cost of the gank fleet, you are a target. If they're bored and you're not fit properly, they might just attack you just because they can. Then, as I mentioned earlier, ganking revolves around EHP versus DPS. EHP stands for effective hit points, which are your hit points once you factor in the resistances of your ship. While warping quickly or hauling as much as you can in as few trips as possible is very enticing, these do come with trade-offs. A tornado can do about 11,000 damage before your resists are factored in one volley. So in general, if you have less than 11,000 EHP, you will die to a single volley. Most gankers are going to be using faction EMP ammo to shoot into the hole in your shield's EM resistance, which is usually 0%, and most haulers will be shield tanked, as the low slots will usually have your utility modules. So with that in mind, I wanted to get into the fitting theory behind how to fit a hauler for high-sec hauling. I'm going to start off with the low slots here on my Iteron Mark V, and with that in mind, we want to try and hit 11,000 effective hit points against the EMP ammo damage profile. So to start off, I'm pretty much always going to want to have a damage control on my ship, because it gives you bonuses to your shields, armor, and your structure hit points. So just by having that damage control on, you're getting your structure hit points, or your structure resistances up to a even 60 across the board. And as you see, our structure hit points are our highest base value of hit points. So having that bonus does a lot for us. It gets us from 4K up to 5,500 EHP. So I'm pretty much always going to use the damage control. You could also get a abyssal damage control. You can get a pretty cheap roll. I have a Decayed on a Tech 2 damage control, but you just want to look for that EM resistance roll. So by having that on your ship, just by getting that extra bit of EM, you can get up to 63%. It adds a little bit to your structure, or to your overall EM resistance, which is a pretty cheap way to get a little bit more effective hit points out of your ship. But for right now, I'm just going to go with the Deck 2 damage control. Then the next module is the expanded cargo hold, and these will increase your cargo hold's capacity at the expense of both your velocity and your structure hit points. which is not ideal. But being able to carry more stuff is usually the whole point of having a hauler. So those are usually one of those items you want to keep in mind their effect on your hit points. Then next we have our inertial stabilizers. And our inertial stabilizers are going to reduce your align time at the expense of a little bit increased signature radius. Which our signature radius isn't really a big deal. Like, if anything's going to shoot us, they're going to hit us pretty well anyhow. We're a big, slow hauler. But that align time is pretty nice, being able to warp off of gates a little bit faster. It'll cut down on your travel time. But it is not enough to warp off fast enough that you're not going to get targeted or locked up. So it's really just a quality of life, getting around faster type of thing. And they don't have any penalties to your hit points, which is good. Then going to our nanofibers, they have a similar effect as the inertial stabilizers, but it's actually less of a align time bonus. But you also get a bonus to your velocity, but we don't really care about our velocity in a hauler in high sec. But it does have a reduction to your structure hit points. So for high sec hauling, we don't want a nanofiber. Then we go into our reinforced bulkheads. They are going to actually slow down our align time at the perk of getting more structure hit points. And since we are getting a nice even 60% to our structure resistances, having an extra structure hit points is really nice, and it's also bonus boosting our highest base hit points. So these are pretty good. These are also the reason why people hull tank ships, because you get these flat bonuses with damage control. So you can take a Brutix or something and really get your structure hit points up, and don't have to worry about having any holes in your resistances. But they do have the unfortunate effect of reducing our cargo hold capacity. So that is the big downside with reinforced bulkheads. Those are nice if you're going for max tank, or if we're trying to get up over that 11k EHP threshold. And then last and least are our warp core stabilizers. These are going to increase your warp core strength, or your warp bonus strength, by 2. So it's going to make it where a warp disruptor, which has 1 point, is not going to be able to tackle you, be able to warp off. Warp scrambler has 2 points, so you're not going to be able to get tackled by a warp scrambler. The only thing would be a faction warp scrambler, which has a warp scramble bonus of 3 points, so they're going to have to take a faction scram to stop you when you have warp core stabilizer. But as we saw earlier in that gank that I showed you, you're going to die instantly. So a warp core stabilizer is going to have absolutely no help to you in high sec hauling. So that's another one that we're just going to trash it, because that is of no use to us. So you really just have 4 modules here. So for today, I'm going to try and get max cargo hold while also being able to survive a tornado. So I'm going to go ahead and throw 4 expanded cargo holds in, which gets me to 19,000 M3 in my cargo. But it also brings my structure hit points down to 426, and kind of negates the bonus that my damage control gave me, because I have very, very few structure hit points right now, and I only have 3,500 EHP. So then that brings us into our mid slots. We are going to try and get our EHP up to 11,000 minimum against EMP ammo so that we can survive a tornado, and we're going to try and do that with our mid slots here. So with that in mind, afterburners and MWDs aren't really going to help us at all, because as you saw earlier, you're going to die instantly, so you're not going to be able to turn these on. If you need these, you messed up and you're going to die anyhow in high sec, so there's no reason to really fit a afterburner or an MWD unless you're going to be doing the cloaky trick, which I'll show you guys later. But for right now, we're just trying to survive a tornado, so those are no good. I'm going to get rid of those. So that brings us into our shield extenders, So we have our large shield extender, which is ideal. But the problem with that is it is very power grid hungry. So we are at 130% of our power grid. We could try and get our rig slots to counteract that, but that's pretty far off. Or use a reactor or something, but then that's cutting into our expanded cargo holds. So let's just say the large shield extender is not going to fit on our Iteron. So let's go into medium shield extenders, because an active tank is not going to help you. You're going to die instantly, so we want a buffer tank. So we're going for our shield hit points. So I'm going to just throw on, let's say, 3 of these. So that brings our hit points up to 4,800, and that brings us to 10,000 EHP. So we're getting pretty close to tanking a tornado, but we're not quite there yet. Also, you have to keep in mind whenever you're using the Eve fitting tool, this is your effective hit points with a uniform damage type to your resistances. So that means this is not factoring in this EM hole in our shields into our effective hit points. And there's not really a way to do that in the Eve fitting tool. So you can actually go and copy this, and we can open up Python and throw that fit into our Python fitting assistant. And that's going to give you a better idea, because we can actually go up here and select what type of damage is getting shot at us, and we can go and select EMP ammo. So as you can see, our 10,000 EHP here is actually only about 9,000 EHP. So right now we're going to die to a tornado. So we don't want that. So let's try and fill that EM hole now that we have some, hit points with these shield extenders. So the big question is, do you use a hardener or an amplifier? A hardener looks much better on paper. As you can see here, with that on, we have 56% shield EM resistance. And we can even overheat it and take it up to 65% EM resistance. But you're going to die instantly, so you're not going to get a chance to turn this on. So if you have one of these fit, it's like you have no EM shield resistance. You still have that hole. You're not going to be able to turn it on in time before you get shot. So these are pretty much useless in high sec, especially when hauling. So that's where our EM shield amplifiers come into place, because these are on all the time. You just have a passive resistance of 40.5%. This is with the skills trained up a little bit, because the EM shield compensation skill increases the resistance bonus to shield amplifiers. So that is something that's good to train up a little bit, for this scenario. And that is a passive shield resistance, so that's always on. We're always going to have 48% here. So that brings us up to 11,271, which should give us enough to survive a tornado. But let's double check here and throw it into Python to see what it's actually going to be against the damage profile of EMP ammo. So we still have our EMP ammo here selected. And now we're at 12.4 thousand EHP. So even without any of our rig slots filled up, we can tank a tornado shot right now with our full expanded cargo holds down here. So that brings us to our rig slots. Now that we know that our fit here can tank a tornado, we're going to try and see what kind of stuff we should put into our rig slots. So there's pretty much 6 different mods here that you'd really want to put onto a hauler. So we have our transverse bulkheads, our Trimark armor pumps, and our core defense field extenders. And these are going to increase your structure hit points, armor hit points, and shield hit points, respectively. And the way these work is it gives you a % bonus increase to your hit points. So since that works off a percent increase, and with shields being our highest, we aren't really going to want to use bulkheads or armor pumps. We're going to probably want to go with our field extenders, because that's going to give us the most hit point increase of the three. But we already know that we can tank a tornado shot as it is, so we don't really need these. This would only be good if you're trying to get up to be able to tank 2 tornadoes. Because if you can tank 2 tornadoes, you're pretty much wiping out any casual gankers. You know, any chance of getting killed by any casual gankers. You'd have to get somebody who's really serious that's going to be able to coordinate 3 tornadoes on you at once, which is pretty unlikely unless, like, they know that you are carrying stuff and they're, like, going after you specifically. But you can already tank a tornado shot here, so we don't really need to go for any more max hit points, really. So that leaves us with our pretty much bread and butter for a hauler. It's going to be our medium cargo hold optimization, our hyperspatial velocity optimizers, and our low friction nozzle joints. So our cargo hold optimization is going to increase your cargo hold at the expense of, now, armor hit points. But this is why we have a shield tank, so our armor hit points don't really matter all that much. So we could try putting 3 of these on. And on paper now, that's getting us a little into sketchy territory. But we can actually double check this in PIFA just to make sure, since they're probably going to be shooting EMP ammo at us. And we still have 12.2k EHP, so we can go max cargo fit with our damage control and our medium cargo hold optimization rigs, and that brings us up to max cargo. But if you don't actually need to have max cargo, we could go with one of the other 2 options, which are hyperspatial velocity optimizers, which are usually just hyperspatials, and then our low friction nozzle joints. So our medium hyperspatial velocity optimizers actually are going to increase our warp speed. So this is pretty clutch because, you know, warping faster is going to cut down on your travel time. You know, these big, long systems that you have to get across, you know, having a couple of these on your ship is going to actually cut down on your warp times quite a bit. You can bump that up to 5.5 with Tech 1 hyperspatials. So now you're warping, you know, frigate speeds. So that's pretty nice. Or you can go with low friction nozzle joints, which are pretty much like the inertial stabilizers of rigs. So that's going to get your align time down, with also the armor hit points going down. But, you know, we figured out that doesn't matter. So you can choose whether you want to go max cargo or, you know, go for warp speed or align time. So, you know, if you're doing shorter trips, I think align time's usually better. If you're doing, you know, more long haul things, being, you know, having that increased warp speed is pretty nice. So let's go ahead and throw on max cargo. And that pretty much sums up how to fit a hauler, because we can survive a tornado shot. We don't have any modules that we have to turn on. Everything's passive. This here's a winning fit. We don't need to have anything in the high slots. You know, you could try and fit a cloak on there for the MWD trick, but that would throw off our tank. So this is a nice safe fit for getting around in high sec. Now, there are some active things you can do also once you undock to make yourself a more difficult target. Docking and undocking are times that you're extremely vulnerable to ganks and scans, so to help combat this, it is smart to make Insta-Docks and Insta-Undock bookmarks. So to make an Insta-Undock bookmark, get into a fast ship with an MWD, undock, and click on your ship speed to 100% to continue in the same direction as the undock. Travel at a minimum a few hundred kilometers from the undock, or bonus points for getting off the station grid entirely, then make a safe and name it accordingly. Now, when you undock, you can instantly warp to your safe spot, and you won't get cargo scanned or popped, especially since you were invulnerable for a few seconds after you undock. Then, when docking, even with warping to 0, there is a small chance that you will land outside of docking range and take a couple of seconds to dock up. So this is a time you are very vulnerable to a suicide gank. So now get into your fast ship again and create a safe spot tight to the station, preferably behind where players dock so that any ganking ships will be very far away from you, and there is 0 chance for you to be outside of the docking range. Then another quick trick is to set your target station as your destination and turn on your autopilot after you initiate your final warp. Your autopilot will automatically dock your ship after you land, and this is the only time you should ever be using your autopilot while carrying cargo with any kind of value. Going AFK while undocked or using autopilot is just begging a ganker to mess with you. Then we have the famous Cloaky Trick. So the Cloaky Trick is effective on DSTs and T1 haulers, and I've even seen a guy that would run Tama gate camps in a friggin' orca. So to do the Cloaky Trick, we are going to select our outgate, and then we are going to select Align 2. Not Warp 2 or Jump 2, because it will activate our warp drive, and then it'll mess up our cloak cycle. So we're going to hit Align 2. We're going to turn on our MWD and our cloak at the same time. We're going to turn off our MWD so that it only runs 1 cycle. And then we are going to time this just right so that when the cloak ends, or the MWD cycle ends, we're going to turn off our cloak. And then our ship should warp instantly, and we will not become targetable. So this is a really good trick to pretty much warp instantly without being lockable in high sec, low sec, or null sec. At least in high sec, the pretty much only counter to this would be station fighters, upwell fighters, because they are super quick and nimble, and they would be able to decloak you before your cloak cycle or your MWD cycle ends. And in low sec, they'll sometimes litter the gates with wrecks, cans, and abandoned drones to increase the chance that you spawn within 2,500 meters of an object after you jump in, and then you won't be able to activate your cloak. But, you know, this is more common in low sec or null, and not really an issue in high sec. Then my last tip is to use a scout to check ahead of you for ganks, or you can use a third-party tool called eve-gatecheck.space. It's a pretty cool website. It will tell you how many kills have happened on gates in the last hour, so it works pretty much like your autopilot does. So you'll set your starting system, your destination, prefer your route, short of secure or unsecure, any system you want to avoid, click on check, and then it'll tell you if there's been any kills in the last hour on any of those gates. So as we can see, Amazon from Jita to Amar hasn't had any kills lately. I don't know how much I trust that, but you at least have a better shot than just jumping in there blind. Then it's a little bit more advanced, but worth mentioning. Freighters can use a corp mate to travel with them in a webbing ship like a rapier or a freighter to help them warp much faster, but you know, this is very niche, and if you're at that level, you probably know what you're doing. High sec might seem safe, but in reality, it's a hunting ground for opportunistic gankers. The best way to survive is to make yourself a bad target. Fly smart, stay alert, never assume you're untouchable, always keep your cargo value below the gank threshold, fit for maximum tank, pay attention to the local chat and D-scan, and if something feels off, trust your gut, dock up, reroute, or wait it out. At the end of the day, EVE is all about risk management. You will lose ships eventually, but by following these strategies, you can ensure that it's on your terms and not the gankers. Stay safe, stay sharp, and fly dangerous.